Hi, HR nerds. This is Nicole Dessain. Welcome to Talent, the show where I interview leaders who have brought design thinking to their talent and HR practices. In today's episode, we have a special guest on the show. I'm joined by Danielle Crane, who is the Chief Talent Officer at GreenPath. Welcome, Danielle.
Thanks for having me.
Danielle, what's your story?
Yeah, so I think probably most notably, I am the girl who almost didn't enter the field of HR. I went to a liberal arts college and was on track for a dual degree in English and HR. I did one HR internship at a hospital system my junior year and promptly quit the profession about 48 hours later. HR literally sat like in the basement down this long white concrete hallway, like between two locked doors, and everybody in the company just like hated interacting with them, only did so when a process, made them do so. And so I marched back into my career counselor's office. I was like mad as heck because she had suggested HR as a potential career path for me. And I thought like, man, this woman hates me, right? And I'm lucky. She's very good at what she did. She got me to like pause and breathe for a second. And then she challenged me to try another internship and, think about designing a career path that changed who HR could be in an organization versus settling for maybe what I had been exposed to.
Oh, that's super progressive.
Yeah.
To give that advice. Yeah.
I'm grateful. So yeah, I've done that. And now I have a career that I love, and I've had a ton of fun over the last 10 to 15 years now.
Did you end up designing it?
Yeah. I'm pleased with where I'm
cool. We'll talk a little bit about that, since that's the purpose of the call, I guess. So
yeah.
But first, share with us people you really are usually interested in learning about. My interview partner's creative superpower. What's yours?
Oh man. So I'll show you my Post-it note here. Hopefully you can get it. So these are humans, if you can't tell.
Yeah.
And then these are like questions and ideas. So, I think that I am a connector of humans and ideas. If you're familiar with Gallup Strength Finders, individualization and learner are two of my top strengths. And so individualization is all about having the ability to see what's unique in people and like what motivates them, how they tick. And then learner is about having just this insatiable curiosity around things. And so I think when I'm able to like intersect both of those superpowers, it really feels like magic is happening.
Oh, cool. That's so cool. I love that little stick figures with the little light bulbs.
Anybody can be one.
I know. And, that's, I always say, stick figures are A-okay.
They're for everybody.
Need to be Picasso.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about how you discovered design thinking and how you've applied it at GreenPath.
Okay. Yeah, so I always say like a little bit of luck and a little bit of love in terms of how I discovered it. Luck in that I gained a new CEO about 4 years ago who had immersed herself in design thinking practices and was passionate about bringing that with her into our organization. And so at her advice, I attended the Luma training, which was kind of the basic foundational principles. And so after attending that, I really did fall in love with how organizations were using design thinking to creatively problem solve and design new stuff. And, most of them were doing it for their customers. And then I kind of thought like, well, hey, I've got customers, they're internal versus external. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really interested in exploring that. I think too, as I mentioned, I've never really considered myself a traditional HR person, primarily because rules and process tend to like make me break out in hives. And so the idea of like being able to apply some of these methods to solve for some of our pain points, not just through enforcement of things, was really attractive to me. So in terms of some of the ways that we're using it, so I should also share, I'm a big fan of Dan Ariely, who's the professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke. And mm-hmm. So we are pairing a lot of the design thinking principles with the behavioral economics principles. Mm-hmm. So design thinking to kind of like understand the need, and then behavioral economics to change the behavior on the back end there. Mm-hmm. So a couple ways. Well, this one came to mind pretty clear due to the last few weeks' events. About a year and a half ago, we used the Immersion technique as we were starting to deploy about a third of our workforce to go remote. And so I was really grateful that we'd gone through that exercise and, captured those learnings because, 3 weeks ago when we were faced with the situation of needing to get 100% of our workforce remote, we were able to get about 200 people remote thanks to the learnings that we had captured, through using Immersion and all of that. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity right now as our employees' needs are changing to be using those design thinking principles to uncover employees' current needs, maybe versus what we knew the needs to be before.
Can you share a little bit more about how this immersion worked? Because I'm sure people can really benefit from this now.
Yeah, so immersion really is like putting yourself in the situation of your potential user. And so as we were going through the immersion, we did an immersion week where all of the teams that support our employees had to go work in an environment that that our remote employees were working in. And so they had to use the tools and the technology, and they couldn't schedule their meetings around the times that they would be in the office. And, so we put some constraints around it as well. And I think that, we had all of our talent teams do it. So, our employee experience, talent development, quality, our compliance teams, we had our IT teams do it so they could even experience, some of what a user does. And we learned a lot. One of the simplest learnings that we had was people couldn't contact our IT help desk because they couldn't get into their system, right? So unless you had the help desk number programmed into your cell phone, if you were truly locked out, like you were stuck, you were texting, everybody in the company to try to get you up and running again. And so one of the changes that we made in our new hire process is actually like programming IT's number into your phone when you first come on board. And so that was kind of a cool change that came from that. Was that helpful?
Yeah, so it looks like you captured some of the learnings from that immersion, and now that comes in really handy.
Yeah, so we moved really quickly, as I mentioned, to get 200 people, working remotely in less than 10 days. And I think that it was because of that immersion week experience, and we had, done quite a bit to improve that process, by lifting up those learnings that enabled us to move as quickly as we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. And just a reminder, please put your questions in the chat. We'll get to them at the end of the interview. So I know you've also used design thinking. So this is obviously very topical, but I know you've used them in other areas as well. Do you want to share a couple more examples?
Sure. Yeah, so I think one of the most fun ways that we've leveraged design thinking is in our benefit plan design. And so I can give a few examples of that. We use journey mapping quite a bit, but when we journey mapped our new hire experience.
Can you explain a little bit for those who are not that familiar? Yep.
Yeah, so journey mapping is really to pair alongside your user and map out their highs and lows as they're going through your experience, whatever, if it's a process, so for example, when we used it for our new hires, we really mapped their experience out from recruitment to first day on the job. And, got a feel for, where were they feeling like we did just an amazing job so that we could leverage those opportunities and do more of that. And then where were they feeling pain points? And so one of the areas that we identified was benefit enrollment was a pain point. Probably not a shock to anybody in HR. It's why we're constantly chasing open enrollment and, but specifically, we started to learn that people weren't enrolling in our retirement plans because they were receiving so many communications that first week that the barrier of having to log into a system that I've never logged into, set up a user ID and password, and then actually have to make decisions around my benefit plans just caused people to freeze and say I'll just do it later, right? And then later, turns into 10 years from now and you still haven't saved anything for retirement. And so we, again, had lifted up that need through journey mapping, and then we applied the behavioral economics principle of reducing friction. And so we put an auto enrollment on our benefit plans and in our retirement plans specifically back in 2016 or so. And as a result, we have seen our participation rate increase from about 38% of our employees participating to around 84%
in
less than a 3-year period.
Wow. And the auto enrollment, though, provides the option to opt out,
Yeah,
right? So, but
exactly.
they
Yeah.
have to actively opt versus the other way around. They have to
Yeah.
opt in. They're in. They have to opt out if they don't want to participate, right?
Yeah. And so the cool part about that is we actually created friction for them to opt out,
Yeah.
right? So we made it easier for them to actually stay in and save versus creating friction to go in and opt out. So
Just curious, what's been the reaction from the employees? Because, some who are cynical could say, who are
yeah.
you to make the decision for your employees, right? So I'm just curious. I mean, obviously, I think it's great. People should save more for obvious reasons, but just curious what then the employees, how did they respond? Did they like it? Did they think that was inappropriate, or what was sort of their?
It's a funny question. Actually, the girl who does all of our payroll and benefits was one of those people, when we first started talking about doing this.
Yep.
She was like, no, like I'm not making that decision for other people. And,
Interesting.
and so we had to do a fair amount of education around like, what does it look like? And really taking a look at the demographics of our workforce. A good percentage of our workforce comes straight out of school. And, so, we were able to kind of reframe it to, it's almost our duty, to educate team members in a different type way. And we're still giving them choice, right?
Right.
So we didn't remove the option of choice. We just made it easier for them to make the one, right? And they can opt out, or they can go in and change their percentage. So that was the other kind of step that we took is we did some interviews with employees and truly went in with that beginner's mindset to understand, like, when you go in and elect your percentage, why do you choose what you do, right? So we had seen previously that a lot of employees were choosing around like the 3% mark. We're like, what is it about 3%? It's not a match. We have a separate, pension contribution. So there wasn't any, financial incentive to stick to the 3%. And we learned that like there actually wasn't a whole lot of logic around it. Like people just the number 3, right, was relevant, and they chose 3. And so we actually then again used the behavioral economics principle of defaulting, and we defaulted them to 7%. And we found that people just didn't really change it. Once they started contributing at the 7%, they were comfortable doing so. And again, that friction, barrier there. And so we were actually able to increase our average contribution percentage from 2016. It was about 3.4%, and we're now at about 15%. So again, in a 3-year period or so, some pretty material changes.
Great.
Yeah.
What I like is that you kind of combine different methods, right? So design thinking is a qualitative method. So it looks like you use journey mapping, maybe persona-based journey mapping as a design thinking method. But you also use data. It looked like, you looked at your data first to understand the problem, right? Then you use design thinking to get more color around the problem and what people are experiencing, and then use behavioral economics principles to then design interventions. Does that sound sort of like the combination of approaches?
You said it more eloquently than I ever could.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah. So, and that's, I always say that, you should combine design thinking, especially in our field when we apply it to HR with, in general probably too, but I know HR, right, with other methods to make it, a very comprehensive approach. Very cool. Did you do anything else around the benefits, or is that sort of?
Yeah. So, you mentioned personas. One of the things that we did is we leveraged personas to help our employees connect the benefits we were offering to the needs that they were lifting up. So, a good example of this is we uncovered a common need between 2 large groups that we had in our workforce. And so the first group was people that were going to school in addition to working. And then the second group was new parents. And so as you might anticipate, the common need was sleep. Like, this is a really tired group of people. And so we decided to offer a rest and relaxation room at our headquarters to meet that need. So, employees can book a half hour to, just kind of chill out, close their eyes. And so, rather than saying like, okay, we've got a nap room, go use it, we created personas for each of those groups to say like, this is this is what's offered and this is the need that it's meeting, please use it if it can meet that need. And so I think that just helped people feel, more confidence that we really were taking their needs into account and trying to design solutions to meet the needs that they were lifting up.
Yeah, interesting. So you really tied it to the persona and the need that they have, so they understand why you're doing it, instead of some generic benefit. Hey, we put this room in, and everybody's like, why and for whom is it? So you really tied it also probably in the communication.
Yes.
Very cool. So again, just a reminder, please put your questions in the chat. We'll get to them shortly. But then, Danielle, so let's talk a little bit about barriers. People usually want to know, as they contemplate using design thinking, what barriers have you encountered in bringing human-centered design to the organization, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, I can name a couple. I think the first barrier, the largest barrier that we faced, was people thinking that it was silly. Or even childish. We were moving from a culture that rewarded having really polished PowerPoints with, articulate, refined talking points, to using a million Post-it notes and drawing stick figures. And I think that people doubted whether that was like effective, professional, or even just like a good way to work. And so it's been a movement, I think, to get people on board with the benefits that can come from using constraints and creativity. We used teach to learn concept to overcome that one. So, one of the things that we know to be true about our workforce is they really like helping other people. And so they felt good when they were teaching somebody something else. And so, that kind of created this natural enrollment in some of design thinking principles, because as they were charged with teaching others how to do it, they wanted to do it really well. So they, kind of got in and understood it. And I think started to secretly fall in love as they were helping others learn.
I love that. I love that. I hadn't heard about that concept. So, obviously I've heard and done that concept, but I didn't know there was actually a term for that. So.
Yeah. Teach to learn.
Teach to learn. Interesting. Yeah. And then so it's interesting, depending kind of your current culture, right? And the norms and the professional behaviors or whatever of your culture, you might face different barriers in introducing design thinking, right?
Totally.
So I also come from a, professional services background, also consulting. So PowerPoints only, right? So I get that's maybe seen initially as not professional. And, we saw your little stick figures, and I draw similarly. We're not professional. No, I love them. We're not professional artists, right? And it looks kind of on a Post-it note, it looks unpolished. So, how might we take a culture and employees from that culture to another place? So I love that concept that you described. So tell us a little bit about you talked about the impact for benefits specifically, but overall, what's the impact you've noticed after having introduced human-centered design in your organization?
So I think the biggest impact is I'm not feeling like I have to push our humans as hard to do what they just need to do. And so I mentioned earlier, that I really hate rules and process and enforcement, but the reality is there's a lot of that exists in HR because it has to, because there are regulations behind it, because people need to get paid, people need, and so, I think that I find myself not having to pull people through stuff so much, that we're designing experiences for them that they actually look forward to being a part of, or they can see the clear benefit on the back end. And so they're just more personally motivated to do what they need to do versus doing it because Danielle is telling them that if they don't do it by Friday, that, they're going to have some major consequence. Which I also still do a little bit.
Right. But the latter is more like a parental sort of child relationship, right? Which sometimes in HR we've played or we've had to play, right? But the former sounds much more of an interaction between adults, right? Which I think we all.
Yeah, it's way more fun,
right? It's way more fun. And I think we were just talking about it, that you have a 2-year-old at home, especially right now. Everybody is at home and having their kids. So you have to do that there anyway. So,
Trust me.
why not
Yeah.
ease up a little bit?
Yeah. He reminds me every day that I don't get to choose what humans do. So, yeah. Um, yeah.
Oh, okay. So just a quick reminder again, please put questions in the chat if you have any. Before we go there, Danielle, share your favorite design thinking resource or hack with us.
Okay. So the Bootcamp bootleg, I don't know if you're familiar with it at all. Okay, so this is a document that was produced by the D School at Stanford, and it essentially is an open source tool available on the internet. So you can just Google Bootcamp bootleg D School Stanford. And it's basically a breakdown of like the 5 stages of design thinking, and walks through different techniques and like when you might want to try applying them. And so I use it kind of like a recipe book. So, I think like, I can't figure out what to start for dinner, I go to my recipes for inspiration. Same thing, like if I can't figure out how to solve for something, or I'm having trouble getting started, then I pull out that Bootcamp bootleg and dig in.
So can you give an example of what's in there? Like,
so, I mentioned earlier, like the beginner's mindset, right? So, it walks you through, it's just kind of, so the actual document's probably about 30 pages or so, but each of the techniques is just a 1-pager. And it walks you through like the definition of a beginner's mindset, how you go about doing it. So one of the first things it says is like, pretend you're a 4-year-old, right? What do 4-year-olds ask all the time? Why, right? And, kind of walks you through, for example, in that one, how do you go about forgetting everything you think you know about a topic? Because that's truly what beginner's mindset is. And I think we struggle to do that in HR because we are so rewarded for our expertise and like having the answers and guiding people in the right way that, there's not a lot of reward systems around having a beginner's mindset. And so, the boot camp just kind of helps me get like in that framework and gives a true like how to. And it doesn't assume that anything's obvious.
And I think that's true not only for HR, but for our entire business world usually.
Completely.
We're not rewarded to fail, which is a big term in design thinking, right?
Yes.
We are rewarded to succeed.
Totally.
So to introduce this beginner's mindset, experimentation, failure mindset is
totally
counterculture in really almost, all, I would think, for-profit organizations and non-for-profits maybe too. Very cool. So I think that's a good tip. Would you also say that's a good way for people who want to get started?
Yes.
With using design thinking in HR to use that resource?
Yeah, you don't need to know anything about design thinking to pull that resource. And again, it'll give you kind of a high-level overview of some options.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So I usually close before we go into the open Q&A with me giving you a quote and you reacting to it. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Quote, creativity is seeing what everyone else has seen and thinking what no one else has thought. Unquote, Albert Einstein.
I love that. I've actually never heard that one before. So I guess the reason that I love it is because I do think we get, we all pass by the same things every day, right? The way we absorb those things and the way we process those things and like what we do with those things can really lead to some pretty unique outcomes. And so I love that.
Very cool. Good. Okay, so let's go in the chat. I got a question from Sean, and he's asking, how did you use a loop in the process to validate the solutions introduced were beneficial? I assume he means what you shared about the benefits.
Yeah. So a couple of things, again, balancing like that qualitative and quantitative data. And so, particularly around the retirement plans, but even like with the rest and relaxation room, people had to book it. And so like periodically we would just check the logs to see like, are people actually using it or is it just sitting there empty? So we were able to like actually see the data behind our changes there. I think that qualitatively, we periodically do engagement surveys or, and so we've seen comments in each of those that speak to some of those changes in a really positive way. And so we know, one of the most recent ones that I saw was, an employee who was actually leaving us. She'd been with us for about 10 years, and she was thanking us for setting herself up so well for retirement, and just really appreciated that she had that education, because she'd started with us right out of school and knew that might not have been an education that she'd get somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a great point, because sometimes, we think the experience with our employees ends when they exit the organization.
Yeah, no.
So, and that's really, it's kind of one of my shticks to say that that's really an outdated concept.
Yeah.
Because what is a average tenure of employees these days is 3 years or something like that, right?
2.8, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Depending on the demographics, probably,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
but what sometimes now happens is, people might go back to college, they might go to get other experiences, but they might consider to come back, right? So, and the research shows that returning employees are some of the greatest employees, but we've historically we've had sort of a fraught relationship with our employees who left. So I think it's really good to think through how might we shape that experience. So,
and they're huge referral sources,
right?
Not just for
they're
employees,
referrals.
For
they're
clients and customers.
Exactly. They're referrals for employees. They might become customers and so forth. So, how might you design that experience?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Please put them in the chat. While we wait, something that you said earlier stuck out to me, so I just wanted to dive in that a little bit more. You said something around, early on in your career, when you contemplated using design thinking, you realized that you have customers too.
Mm-hmm.
And I know sometimes that's sort of historically also been maybe a debate in HR, or maybe not, have we always seen our employees and maybe leaders more than employees, I don't know, as customers. So I'm just curious how you've come to think that way, if you kind of can explain that, and what tip you might have, or what, I don't know, insight for others, how to approach it, or how to view employees and leaders as customers.
Yeah, and I think it's a common, I understand why it's a challenge for people, because when you look at even just organizational budgets and spend, right? Our marketing teams and those that are targeting our external customers are usually more well-funded than any HR team I know. And so I get that. But in reality, my job doesn't exist without them. And so, when I think about who am I here to serve, it is the people that I work with. And, I'm not, again, back to kind of the rules and process. I'm not an enforcer. I am here to make their experience great, so that they keep choosing us. There's a lot of choice out in the employment market. Well, yeah, maybe not as much.
Right. I know.
I was like, well, that's 3 weeks old now, isn't it?
I know.
Yeah, there was a lot of choice out in the employment market, and there will be again, there will be again. And so,
right. I think maybe it's that. And so that's an interesting comment you made there too. It's reframing this, they have a lot of choice, and how might we reframe this for the current situation, right? So they might not have a lot of choice right now, but how might we approach that situation with empathy?
And you're an employee too, so think about what's the experience that you would want as
HR.
Yeah, we're not absolvent from that.
Yep. So, we got one last question for you.
Let's do it.
What were the pivotal moments that enabled the leadership support time investment in taking a design thinking approach versus other approach, for example, benchmarking and so forth?
Yeah, I think as we started to see wins. So, we also adopt the fail fast. And so we are an organization that was very high on quality, which meant a very high upfront investment in things. And that went poorly for us often. And so I think that, bringing in concepts like fail fast or act to think. So, just taking a step forward if you're feeling stuck and getting something going. We started to see decreased spend and investment on stuff that never came to fruition. And so, I think those early wins started to get even some of the naysayers on board.
Great. Thank you so much. We're at the end of our time. Thanks for joining us. It was so great to learn from you. Thanks everybody for joining us, and I hope I see you at a future Talent Tales. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nicole. Bye-bye.